I really do want to get us kicked off here quickly, make sure that we're on time. We're scheduled to run from 10 until 11:30. Hopefully, you all are joining us to participate in this particular event. It is going to be a discussion of the book, Purpose and a Paycheck, Finding Meaning, Money, and Happiness in the Second Half of Life. And we are going to be joined by Chris Farrell, who is the author, and I will get to introducing him in just a minute. I do want to set some ground rules. I'm going to guess that this is nothing new to any of you. We will ask that you please mute yourself. It just can be distracting if you hear a phone ringing in the background, rustling of paper. So please do mute yourself. You will have a chance to ask questions. Please do chat into the chat box if you have a question. Michael Hare is going to be manning our chat box and flagging us for questions. And I know Bob and I and Chris will probably keep our eyes open too. We'll specifically stop as we go along too to engage with the audience to kind of get your specific questions. I also want you to know we are recording. You can see that little button in the corner. We had several people drop us an email saying, I signed up, I can't make it. I want to be able to watch this later. So it is being recorded. Bob is generously offered to host it on the Colorado Senior Lobby website. So anybody who's registered will get a copy of this to be able to follow up and watch after the fact. I do want to let you know that there are two organizations that are sponsoring or hosting this. One is Colorado Senior Lobby. The other is Aging 2.0, the Denver chapter. I'd like to introduce Bob Brocker. Some of you will already know Bob, but Bob describes himself as a retired transportation business executive who stepped off the treadmill of travel and work about 10 years ago to put his time and experience to work as a volunteer advocate for aging Coloradans. I think it's interesting that Bob suggests that he stepped off the treadmill of work. I would suggest he stepped off that treadmill and just jumped right onto the volunteer treadmill. Very involved and active as a board member and leader with A Little Help, Colorado Senior Lobby, Dr. Cog's Advisory Committee on Aging, and AgeWise Colorado, and other organizations. Bob, can you just tell, some of the people probably know about Senior Lobby, but some probably don't. Can you offer just a little bit about that and, how
Sure.
they could learn?
Yeah, real quick. We've been around 41 years. We are an organization of all volunteers, nonpartisan. Our task is to educate and inform and advocate. So we do work closely with AARP on some issues, and others, we have different issues that we get involved in. And so we sometimes will initiate a piece of legislation with a legislator. Other times we're following along something that already been introduced. We like to spend a lot of time educating people about issues that affect older Coloradans. So in a brief, that's it. And thanks for the introduction, and good morning to everybody. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Well, and I will just offer, excuse me, I am the ambassador for the Aging 2.0 Denver chapter. And for some, I know you're familiar with Aging 2.0. We have chapters across the globe, about 150 chapters. I'm also the CEO of iAging, which really focuses on all things aging here in Colorado. But on behalf of Aging 2, one of the things that we really focus on is supporting innovators tackling the grand challenges of aging. So we have 8 grand challenges, and you're going, well, what are those and why is that important here today? 2 of those challenges include retirement security, and the other is purpose. And when you look at the title of this book, Purpose and a Paycheck, that ties so directly with those 2 grand challenges. And after having read the book, I really felt like, I'd love to have this conversation with Chris and people that are interested to learn a little bit more about what he's talking about. So I do want to introduce Chris. Let me just offer a couple of sentences here, Chris. Chris is currently Senior Economics Contributor at Marketplace, American Public Media's nationally syndicated public radio business and economic program. He is also economics commentator for Minnesota Public Radio and host of its series, Conversations on the Creative Economy. Love that title, Conversations on the Creative Economy, as well as a columnist for PBS Next Avenue and the Star Tribune. For most of his journalism career, he has written about economics, corporate finance, and personal finance and retirement for Bloomberg Businessweek, New York Times, Kiplinger's, and other publications. I could share more, but I would actually ask each one of you to go to his website. It's chrisfarrell.net. And after this event, really go to the website. You'll learn a lot more about him and see the other books that he's written. It is CHRISFARRELL.net. So Chris, you have written 5 books, with this being your most recent. We are delighted to have you here today. Thank you
Oh,
so
well,
much.
thank you. Thank you for having me. It's just wonderful.
I am actually going to turn over to Bob we're going to start with some questions, and then we'll figure out when we can pull you all in to be involved as well.
Sure.
Well, thank you, Karen, and thanks, Karen, for initiating this whole project that we're involved in today. So Karen read the book and said, hey, we need to do this. We need to talk to Chris. So here we go. So Chris, what led you to write Purpose and a Paycheck Now? Your previous book was Unretirement. And so how does this book build on that?
So if you look at Unretirement, what drove me to write that book, because then Purpose and Paycheck builds on that, is there have been 2 strands to my career: economics and personal finance. And if you think about the last 20, 30 years in personal finance, the story has been about how people haven't saved enough for retirement, and how just retirement was just going to be this miserable period of time for so many people. And then on the economic side, there was always this dire demographics of aging, that we had this aging population, and that was going to undermine the underlying dynamism of the US economy. There's going to be just too few young people supporting too many of these dependent elderly. And I was just sort of fundamentally suspicious about just these sort of dire forecasts, and was this really right? And I started to do this research, and it turned out there was all this research around the world that painted a very different picture about aging and the possibilities of aging, but it wasn't being paid attention to systematic way. So that led to writing the book Unretirement, and sort of rethinking the what might be the expectations during the retirement years. And there's a section in Unretirement where I talked about starting your own business. But I didn't dwell a whole lot on it. And then as I continued to report and give talks and look into more detail, what really elevated Purpose in a Paycheck and made it somewhat different is the focus on self-employment, starting your own business, starting your own social enterprise, starting your own nonprofit organization. And not that everybody is going to be doing that, of course, but that this is something that I think has been underestimated, how important it is. If you look at the Kaufman Foundation data, and the Kaufman Foundation, does a lot of really good work in entrepreneurship, and it has very good data. In recent years, about a quarter of all new businesses are started by the 55 to 64-year-old age group. And that's up from about 15% in the 1990s. Look at things like self-employment. Self-employment is about 13% in your 50s. Then between 60 and 64, it's about 16%. And then if you get older, it's around 21%. So this is what I really wanted to explore, was that aspect. And then the other aspect was about to really combat this notion that as you got older, you were less and less creative. You hit 50 and it was downhill from then on. And so it was fun doing the sort of research into talking to neuroscientists, talking to people that study creativity, and realizing just how wrong that stereotype is and was.
Excellent. Thank you.
It's interesting because you have a whole chapter on the myth of decline.
Yes.
And I think, when any of us, I remember I actually went to work for a senior center, and I was in college, and I thought, I was astounded to see these people were active and engaged and actually moving around. So it just permeates the society. I mean, how do we go beyond that, or how do we get beyond that besides your research, and how do we expand that further?
Yeah, so 2 quick stories. One of the things I start the book off with is John Kenneth Galbraith, and the late economist, and he wrote this essay for the Encyclopedia Britannica when he was 90 years old, and he called it the still syndrome, because people would come up to him and saying, "You're still exercising. And oh, I see, you're still having a cocktail. And then he said his favorite was, people said, hey, you're still alive. And what he calls it, sort of like the still syndrome. And I think it's kind of just like a wonderful story. It's a wonderful essay. As I say, he wrote it when he was 90. And he said, yes, I'm still writing, I'm still exercising, I'm still engaged, and I am still having a cocktail because I enjoy having a cocktail. The other thing is part of the research for the book back in what it would have been probably like 2017. I flew to New York. I live in St. Paul, Minnesota. I flew to New York and went to the Museum of Modern Art, and there was an exhibit of Matisse, and it was of his cutouts, which is probably most of us, the very famous cutouts that he did, at the pool, and the famous blue nude, and they're all these wonderful cutouts. It's kind of sort of like the height of his creativity. And what I had learned is that Matisse had done the cutouts in the last decade of his life, and he died at age 84. And he'd also done it after having colon surgery, and they didn't think that he was going to survive the colon surgery, but he did. And so here's this artist, and he did this creative work really, in the last decade of his life. And then when you start looking around at other artists and you begin to realize Louise May Alcott, that she wrote, it was published age 65, and she wrote it in her early 60s. A River Runs Through It, which one of my favorite books. McLean wrote it when he was 73 years old. He had retired from the University of Chicago. And you just start looking at all the arts, and then you start looking at the crafts, and then you just sort of realize that for so many people, and what the research shows is that if you're creative in your 40s, you can be more creative in your 50s, and you can be more creative in your 60s, because you build on your experience. And there's this talk that was given by the late Steve Jobs at Stanford University in 2005. It's a wonderful talk, and it's online if it's really worth listening to or reading the transcript. And one of the things he highlights is the importance of being able to connect the dots for creativity. But as he says, you can only connect the dots looking back. And so much of creativity is connecting the dots and looking back. And so I think this is just we have stereotypes, they're deeply ingrained. And yet what the research shows us, and I really think if we think about it, the people that we know, just what you were saying at the senior center, if you sort of really think about it, creativity does not decline with age. It can actually grow.
Well, and I think it's one of those things that we just have these old stereotypes in our mind. I'm part of something called Changing the Narrative, and we think of it as being ageist. Sometimes I'm wondering, is it really ageist, or is it just we're really evolving because we're living decades longer and life is changing?
I think it's a combination of the two. One of the I find it really frustrating. And actually, I think there's one aspect of this pandemic, maybe a positive that comes out of the pandemic. Not many positives coming out of the pandemic, but maybe. But one of the things that drive me crazy is the stereotypes about older people and technology. And you can't do the technology. But you think about my first office job. I had an IBM Selectric, and it was so exciting because if you didn't hit the enter button, you could erase the line that you had just typed. But you go from an IBM Selectric, then we went to the dedicated word processing machine, then we're with the PC, the desktop, and then we're with the laptop. I mean, if you think about all the technology that people have absorbed over the years, we can learn technology very easily. And now if you go into any assisted living center, people are on Zoom, just like we're on Zoom. It's just not that difficult. So I think one of the stereotypes that may be breaking down out of the pandemic is the notion that, if you get older, you can't deal with this technology. There's an article in the Sunday Washington Post, and it was a condescending article, but the underlying message was really important. It was about the fastest growing group in terms of online buying, online consumer, is the 65 plus. Now, it makes complete sense that that's been happening during this period of time. But what the assumption of many of these managements had been that people wouldn't do this. They wouldn't understand it. They wouldn't know how to do it. And it was kind of like, no, we need to do it. and they're doing it.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that that stereotype about technology, that people will not be able to hold on to that any longer.
So Chris, a question on that. So how do you think those managers came to that conclusion that older people could not pick up the technology?
You know, I think it has to do with a previous it probably came from a previous generation, where, you know, there was a brief period of time where people did retire around age 60 to 65 and really walked away from the workforce. And so it just kind of became something, you walked away from the workforce. So yeah, and they didn't get involved in a lot of things. You know, now people are, as you mentioned, we're living longer, we're healthier, we're better educated, we're learning all the time. And so we're actually just doing the technology. But the stereotype just sort of evolved, I think, from watching an earlier generation. And it's just no longer true. It was probably never true, but the opportunity was less. Now the opportunity is there. I mean, I was mentioning earlier about self-employment and starting your own business. One of the reasons why so many people can start their own business is because of technology. It makes it actually practical. Steve King, he's a small business consultant out in the Bay Area and really has wonderful data. And, you know, for his data, for the typical person who starts a business 55 and older, it's $5,000 or less. And most of that, because in your office is probably the home, or maybe it's the garage, or a room in the apartment, or your pre-pandemic a co-sharing workspace. But most technology really allows many people to start a business without risking their 401k or their 403b or their retirement savings. So again, there's an incentive, there's a reason to learn it.
You know,
Thanks.
it's interesting because I do think that even I had stereotypes about older people and technology. I know many of the people on the call are familiar with Senior Planet, and you probably are too.
Yes. Yep.
Planet Oats. I was on the second call that they hosted here in Colorado, teaching people about Zoom. I remember sending a note to Tom Camper. There are 40 people on the call. There are 60 people on the call. There are 80 people on the call. There are 100 people on the call. And people are saying, you know, I didn't need to know it before. I need to know it now, and I want to know it.
Yeah.
So that motivation.
Yep.
I would ask, you know, as you travel across the country, you're hearing from older people saying, yes, I want to continue past 65. I want to explore this entrepreneurship. I want to find work. I want to stay connected and engaged. What are you hearing from those people who are older?
So what I'm hearing is there's much more demand for continuing to work um, than there are companies and organizations willing to hire. What was the dialogue, the conversation was truly changing, I think, in 2019, started to show up in some of the surveys AARP does on a regular basis and other organizations, because if you remember back then, managements more and more were complaining about labor shortages. They were worried about not having enough workers. And that did seem to be shifting a mindset from this person is going to retire to how can we retain this person? When you look at industries that are typically more friendly toward people continuing to work longer, there's a strong economic reason. So in many states, with nursing, or with doctors. I mean, remember, I know, and I'm sure some of you know doctors who 20 years ago no longer wanted to be on call. That was the signal, you need to retire at this point. Now it's sort of like, well, what do you want to work? 0.6, 0.5? And the same thing very much with nurses. One of the companies that I visited was Herman Miller, and you all know the Aeron chair and what they manufacture all is made in America. And they have, like many manufacturing companies, an older than typical workforce and highly skilled. So they came up with some programs to keep their workers around longer. So one of them that was particularly striking, open to anybody. Anybody can do it, but you could take up to 12, it had to be consecutive. You could take up to 12 weeks off a year, or it could be 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And you maintain your service, you maintain your pension and your health insurance. And what they found is that people would go move their parents down to Florida, they'd repair that garage that they wanted to do, might explore starting a business, do all kinds of activities, but then they would keep coming back. And so it was a way to keep the skilled worker around for a longer period of time. And then they had another program where you would commit, and this was irrevocable. You would commit to a 2-year retirement period, and you would gradually go down in your hours. And part of it is you needed to train your successor. And the people that I interviewed, they all said that was weird at first. But then you got used to it. And also, I think many of us enjoy being a mentor. And so you like enjoy that mentorship aspect of things. And again, that was to sort of phase people into the retirement. So we're seeing more and more of it, but we still need that tight labor market in order to get more companies and organizations to embrace it.
You know, there was a movie that came out, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, maybe, the Robert De Niro.
Oh, The Intern?
Oh, The Intern. If you haven't seen The Intern, you should see The Intern, because he plays an older guy who starts at a new company as an intern. You know, he doesn't know anything about, not very much at least, about that particular business, but he wants to learn, so he becomes an intern, and he ends up being a mentor to a lot of younger people who are working there. Which reminds me of the point about when you do retire from your career, your job that you've done for a long time, and you want to get into something else, maybe, or there are opportunities available for you, but maybe you've got yourself put into a box where you think, well, this is the only thing I really know how to do. And instead of trying to do a real skill assessment for all the skills that you have learned along the way, besides that one thing. So could you talk about that a little bit, Chris?
I think it's really important that you mentioned skill. And, you know, all of us are sort of, you know, get defined by our job, defined by our titles. And yet your skill set can be very different. And I interviewed a woman who was totally surprised at what she ended up doing. She was 30 years in the sustainability construction industry and just got tired of the airports. I mean, it was just basically airports and hotels, airports and hotels. And she went for a company, she would give talks, a lot of talks. So she went to the University of Minnesota, which has a mid-career shift, and it's geared toward going into nonprofit organizations, but not necessarily. And so, but what she said is just what you're talking about. It forced her to think outside of sustainability, outside of the construction industry, outside of what she'd been doing. And what she became, and what she is absolutely loving is, of course, this is pre-pandemic, she joined the airline industry. And she is the person that when then things aren't going right, she's the person that is on the floor straightening things out and helping people go to where they need to be going and get the systems working up again. And she's loving it. And as she said, it never would have crossed her mind in a second that this is what she wanted to do. But she was around people who were sort of trying to also figure out what they were going to be doing. And she landed on this idea. She had no background. She had no experience. Her first interview with Southwest Airlines was a total disaster. She was not invited back. Her second one, she thought it through, which was at Delta. They did invite her back, and she did get the job. So I do think this is incredibly important. And what it is thinking about your skill set. But then it's also, you know, we all have sort of our own delusions about ourselves. We do. But we also have people who know us over the years. And so the other thing is to talk to friends, colleagues, family. What do you think I'm good at? And, you know, you might be thinking, oh, I'm very empathetic. And they're going to look at you and go, empathy is not your strong suit. But what you're really good at is you are an organizational genius. You can just organize everything. So again, your friends can kind of help you think about what is your skill set, what is it that you're good at. And I always like the suggestion is also, you know, when you're trying to think about it, call your college roommates and ask them, what did I say I wanted to do those late nights when we were having discussions about what the future was going to be like? What did I talk about? They'll remember, they'll remind you. And again, it's a sort of trying to get to just what you're talking about. Open your mind to what might be the possibilities. Because the thing that has struck me in traveling around the country is how creative people can be in coming up with some kind of job that earns them an income that they enjoy, but they would not have thought about if they were sitting in their office and just writing down a list of things that they could do.
Excellent.
I,
Thank you.
I, I want to piggyback on something that Bob brought up, which was he talked about the intern or the internship. And, we're all familiar with apprenticeships, and you even talk a little bit about apprenticeships in the book. I just would share with you here in Colorado, our average age for an apprentice is 27 or 28 in the state program. And I talked to the CWDC, our Colorado Workforce Development Council, and asked them, you could actually offer this to a lot of older adults, and I think they'd be very interested in terms of career shifting. They actually said that their goal is to drive the average age down to 18. So I would ask you, Chris, where in the world of policy could we like incentivize government to maybe open the door to enhance opportunities for, what have you seen in your research that are there states that are doing some great things policy-wise to promote older workers?
Yeah, you've hit on one of the most important aspects of this. So New Zealand, they had, I can't remember what the age limit was, but say 24 or something like that in terms of apprenticeships. And then they just lifted the age limit. And to their surprise, and you can go in your search engine, New Zealand apprenticeships, was how many people 55 plus join apprenticeship programs. And they get the same stipend, they get the same support. And, it was usually a way of a career shift. And so I think that this, and there was a report that came out, I think probably by the White House Council of Economic Advisors in 2017, probably, might have been 2018. And they looked at training of the older adult. And past age 40, you can't see any public dollars at all being spent on the older adult. Now, of course, these are graphs and figures, so I'm sure there's a program or two, but really there's not that much programming devoted toward the older adult. So this is a huge opportunity. And one of the things that we could be doing on a policy level is there's 2,400 American job centers. So if you lose your job, you're going to go to one of the job centers, and this is where you can get some additional training. You can, find another job, but they're really not geared for people 55 and older. And actually, most of them don't have any expertise in helping people 55 and older. And there's also been proposals that they should invest in developing a better self-employment stock of knowledge, again, because of how many people as they get older go into self-employment. And they don't have to reinvent the wheel. AARP has a very good program that you could tap into. Kaufman Foundation has another good program you could tap into. So I think this is one of the areas where, as a nation, we need to be investing more in people, but most of our public dollars go into the early parts of someone's career, and most of our private dollars go into the early parts of someone's career, and very little afterwards. It more depends on the individual. And that typically is being borne by community colleges, which is really, if you talk about college in the United States, you should be talking about community colleges. They're overwhelmed with demand. I think they're wonderful institutions. The only thing is typically they're just running flat out. But that's where a lot of people are going. And so that's where, from a policy perspective, I'd be supporting more community colleges and investing more in programs for training. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's all right. Go ahead, Chris. Follow up.
I was just going to say, so one of the forecasts that I make is over the next 30 years, I think the big transformation in our college and university system is that they're going to become multi-generational institutions, and truly multi-generational institutions. And it's going to be that right now, a lot of colleges and universities have programs that if you want to take that Renaissance Italy class that you never took, and you can go, and they're wonderful and they're great and they're terrific programs, and the professors are really, engaged. But it's more to go back to add to your skills and to get a certificate in order to improve your job. And so this lifelong learning is something of a cliche, but it's really important. And so my guess is in 30 years, right now, if you go to a college campus, it's, between 18 and 30, 18 and 28, most people. And my suspicion is that in 30 years, when you go on a college campus, there will be no majority generation at all. It will be all the generations. And this is both an opportunity for college and university to make money, and they know this. They're starting to move in this direction, but slowly. And it's also a way of turning lifelong learning into a reality.
So does that mean, Chris, that they'll no longer, I went back for my environmental science degree when I was older. They assigned me the label of non-traditional student.
That's the label.
And
That
I
is
thought,
still the label. We got to get rid of that label. We
I,
need to definitely get rid of that label. It's the non-traditional student, just kind of like, what does that mean? But I also think what it means is it's going to be a lot more nano certificates, smaller certificates, because you may not want to take a whole year out, or be able to take a whole year out or 2 years in order to get a degree, but you do want a certificate that says, I did this to the standards of this institution or the standards of this industry, that is then will help you get a job at multiple types of places. So we'll be moving more toward a world of nano certificates rather than a world of more and more people are going to get a master's degree.
right.
Yeah, one quick question, and then I think we're going to open it up to other folk questions. But I was just thinking about what you were saying about the apprenticeships and people going back to school and getting those, mini certificates and so on. And, and probably you all too know a lot of lawyers who have a law degree, but they don't practice law. Yeah. So, they thought they wanted to be a lawyer. But then, after going through law school, it's like, I really don't want to do that. I'd rather do something else. And so, the parallel for me to that with even the apprenticeship programs is maybe you enroll in an apprenticeship program to become an electrician. But along the way, you discover, I'd really rather be a plumber or, a carpenter. And so the whole idea there is just being exposed to that learning experience and then being able to make a decision that's different maybe than the one you started out with.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, that people oftentimes put a lot of pressure on themselves to come up with, what am I going to do next? And we're all aware as you get older that time is shorter, and put a lot of pressure on ourselves to come up with the right idea. And I think you just have to think, no, you're going to make this, try to become an electrician, and you're going to find out, well, I got to make a pivot because I'm going to become a plumber. And that's what happens. And in fact, you may make several pivots. Life doesn't change. And, one of the things that sort of I have realized as I've gotten older, this whole conversation about work-life balance, it never ends. It just never ends, because of grandchildren and children and friends and all kinds of things. Work-life balance is always an issue. It doesn't matter what age you're at. And so it's sort of like, embrace the fact that you may not actually get it quite right, but if you've taken a step, now you've met some new people. You've been exposed to different organizations and different skill sets. And you may have to say, well, that was an experiment that didn't work out. But what it did is it opened this door over here.
Yeah, thank you.
Actually, we'd like to take just open it up for a few questions. Ideally, you would reach down into the reaction box and raise your hand like that, just so that we can be orderly and calling on people. Or anybody have a question?
Well, there's some questions in the chat, I think, Karen.
Michael, did you see any questions in the chat? I've only been seeing one of it.
Well, actually, let me ask Chris, maybe bring a few things together. One is that you've got the money being with people over 50, wealth and income still being there.
Yep.
we have, going back to your post article that you mentioned from this weekend, the problems that we have marketing to people that are over 50. And Flo asked about mixed age teams being considered a positive. You know, the studies showing that mixed age teams are great. I mean, are there entrepreneurial opportunities for people over 50 to target their own group that you see out there that you think about?
I think when I'm seeing a lot of entrepreneurship that's doing exactly that. In the social enterprise side, it's just as people get older and they see they want people to help them work longer, they're sort of starting social enterprises that help people to continue to work longer. In terms of marketing to your customer, I mean, part of it is if you think about marketing, um, uh, you need to know your customer and you need to know what it is they want and what their desires are. So I think we are really set. There are a lot of entrepreneurial opportunities there. And you can sort of break through in terms of not having to worry about stereotypes, prejudices, but you actually can help solve a problem, which is what entrepreneurs do. Entrepreneurs solve a problem. So I see both a lot of activity there, and I think there is also a lot of opportunity there. You can always come up with the companies that are making their shift. IDEO, for example, you know, they've gone out and they've been quite open about their, hiring and have on staff older designers. I mean, they've made a very deliberate step that way. But for all those companies, there are many that, they're not there yet. But marketing to the older customer, and you have an idea about what it is they want, I think that's the basis of a business.
Absolutely. I see Mary Dean has her hand up. Mary Dean, do you want to?
Thank you. It's nice to see a lot of familiar faces. I'm Mary Dean. I'm with Boomers Leading Change. Some of you know me. My question's a bit provocative, and it's going back, Chris, to some of the early points you made about the profile of older adults. I just, we're all living in a new age with racial justice and social justice and equity. It seems to me that a lot is said that is, more sort of a profile of white educated folks, the people who can maybe, have the money or the time on their hands. And Black Americans, Latinx, they may, they're 65 and they're doing childcare for their grandchildren, or they're, they don't have some of these opportunities and luxuries. Is there any data that shows us what their prospects are?
Yeah, I don't think that's a very important, it's not a provocative question, it's an extremely important question. And it's also what you're seeing is the cumulative effect of low wages, working in companies that don't offer health insurance or don't offer a retirement savings plan. And the reality is, if you don't have a decent job in your 50s, the odds that you're going to have a decent job in your 60s are extremely low. And what the pandemic has really done, we've had this conversation, we've known about this in terms of the rise in income and wealth inequalities in the United States over the past 4 decades. But what the pandemic has done is really brought that to the surface and really exposed starkly what is the cost of that. So I think a lot of when we talk about aging and opportunities, a lot of what we're really talking about is changing the career trajectory of many people who did not have a decent career trajectory during their life. I think one of the big challenges when you want to think about our society, and it's an older than typical workforce, if you look at caregiving. So the major was to go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics over the next decade, all the fastest growing jobs are in caregiving, and for obvious reasons. Now, these are minimum wage jobs. These are low wage jobs. They're unstable jobs. So I think the latest figure I looked at was about 21,000 a year. And that has to do because of the inconsistent hours and the low wages. And yet these are in their way, very skilled positions, very skilled jobs. So if you want to have a measure of exactly what you're talking about, it's going to be how do you raise the wages of the people who are doing the caregiving, provide them opportunities for training and career advancement, and how do you get the healthcare industry to treat them as part of the healthcare industry rather than something that's off to the side that is to a large extent looked down upon. So I don't think it's a provocative question. I think that it is actually one of the questions that we face as a society is opening up the opportunities for more and more people. And caregiving is actually one of the ways that many people do stay employed, do continue to participate in society. Many immigrants work longer. Part is the partly as a family unit. But again, you've hit on what I think, and actually in terms of a public policy, we really need to be focusing a lot more on people in their 40s and their 50s and improving their circumstances before they get to their 60s. Because by doing that, what then you're allowing is for opening up the opportunities that we're talking about more easily toward a broader group of people. That's what inclusiveness means.
Other questions? Gosh, I can't believe it. I know most, I won't say most, I know a lot of people. You guys are not timid. Please do ask questions. We want to engage you. So as we're waiting for people to think of a question, I would ask you, Chris, with the pandemic, we've seen a lot of shift towards flex work and a recognition that there's some variability in that flex work, not just location and hours. Does that or has that opened doors? Do you think will that open doors for older people? Just because we can now flex work from home and I don't maybe have to be there all the time.
Yes, so there's a lot of controversy around flex work, and a lot of the controversy is legitimate. It does really, if you're on Social Security and Medicare, flex work actually really does open up a new opportunity for many people because as one Uber driver, again, pre-pandemic, she was 73, interviewed, is, she would turn on her smartphone, to work when she wanted to. She didn't work evenings, didn't work weekends. And, it didn't make much money, but it paid for a vacation with her friends in Europe and staying with her daughter for a month in the winter in Arizona. And you can kind of multiply those stories, but again, they have health insurance and they have an income, so you're just building it on top of that. So the flex work also allows for testing out whether or not you like this self-employment entrepreneurship thing. It's a low-cost way. The platform is going to do a lot of the sales for you, and you can find out whether this is something that you want to be doing or you need to pursue a different way of going about it. There's still the disturbing power imbalance that goes on. The terms can be changed on you at any time. And if you're if you're trying to raise a family or you're trying to save for your retirement, you have so little rights, and you don't get health insurance or retirement savings through these programs. That's a big issue. One of the things that as a society we're going to confront, and we're going to have to continue to confront, is how many contract laborers we have overall. And contract labor can be a wonderful thing if the basics are dealt with. But you don't get the unemployment insurance. They did though with the CARES Act, but as a general rule, you haven't gotten unemployment insurance. You don't have a lot of the protections. You don't get health insurance. You don't get retirement savings. So dealing with the whole contract labor thing is one of the big challenges we face as a society. But I think in general, as you get older, the existence of the gig economy, the share economy, adds to your flexibility, adds to your choices.
I would just share, I was on a call with the World Economic Forum and Mercer, and it was part of Aging 2, where they talked about financial wellness for the 100-year life. And they had Unilever on there. And I thought, well, this is interesting. Unilever had just designed this program that was intended to be flex. This was pre-pandemic, and targeting their older population. And they said they rolled the program out and they thought what they found fascinating, it appealed to every
Everybody.
generation. It was not just the older people. It's like everybody said, hey, because they did tie some sort of healthcare and some sort of benefit package to it. It wasn't the same. It's a full time.
Well, and so I was talking about gig, but in terms of the flexible benefits, so all the surveys, and you all know this, every human resources survey shows people put an enormous priority on flexibility. Managements did not put a big priority on flexibility. And when you look at working from home, the data is squishy. It's not great, but about 10% of the workforce worked from home pre-pandemic. That leapt up to about 30% or more during the pandemic. It's now about 25%. That seems to be where the numbers have gone. Flexibility is desired across the board. And so one of the things that, in terms of thinking about corporate reform, organizational reform, is that flexibility, more managements are going to feel the need to embrace flexibility as part of their benefits package, as part of their approach to how they deal with their workforce. And managers are just going to have to let go that if they're not seeing you, you're not working. And I think what the pandemic gave them is a rousing demonstration for those who were able to continue to work from home, that they did continue to work. They probably actually put in too many hours relative to what they were paid. But the notion that they weren't working, that should be gone. And so, but flexibility, people need flexibility. They need greater flexibility. And that is an enormous demand in the workforce. And again, I think from our experience, what we've learned, unfortunately, in the United States, it's going to depend a lot on how tight is the labor market. Because that's when managers make the adjustments, when they have to.
Right.
Well, and that's a really good point. I mean, having been in a management position, in the past, flexibility is a very hard thing to manage.
Yep.
I think when you think about the education that people get in business schools in particular, I doubt that they're being taught about how to manage a flexible workforce. Maybe they are. That would be something that should be brought up to the fore of, how do you actually do that? It takes more time.
Yeah.
Probably, with all the computer systems we have now, it's probably a little easier if you can program a system to help manage that your workforce that's working in that kind of flexible environment. And flexible could be that maybe they're working for this company for 4 hours a day, and they're working for that company for 4 hours a day or less. And that's just not something that's in the mindset of any corporate executive that I know.
Yeah, no, I think corporate executives are under a lot of pressure actually to learn new skills, managing a remote workforce. There are companies that are designed that way, but most companies are not designed that way. And I know in a lot of the sort of larger nonprofit organizations, and I imagine the same thing in private organizations, managers are very skilled at managing their silos, but what the demand now is to manage partnerships, to manage joint ventures, to manage as a group in order to leverage the resources that you have is a totally different skill set. And I think you're absolutely right. Managing with an eye toward flexibility, that's its own skill set.
Well, even within a company, you mentioned silos. So could you work in marketing for a while and operations for a little while? That kind of thinking is just not there. So how do you get it? We have a question in the chat box.
I saw that Pat Egan asked, what advice do you have for somebody who wants to turn a passion into a job? Like, taking something that they've been passionate about, it could be a hobby, a real interest, and sounds like a career.
So there are a couple of things. One is the advantage of turning your passion into a job is the market. You understand the customer, because if you have a passion, you know other people that share that passion. So you understand the market. So you have a huge advantage right there. You do have to think very seriously, do you want to turn this passion into a job, into a business? And will you still love it once you've done that? Or is this something that really, you know what, you want to keep it out of the market economy? This is something that you just do on the side because it feeds you in a certain way and you don't want it to be a business. And I think you have to take that seriously. And then the other thing is, talk to as many people as you can that are doing something similar to what you're doing. One of the things that has really struck me is how generous entrepreneurs are with their information. And we always think, the entrepreneur is the independent, right? They're the loner. They couldn't work in a corporate environment. They had to go off and start their own business. They're remarkably generous. People who are entrepreneurs, in some sense you might be a competitor at some point, they'll tell you about pricing, they'll tell you about what they learned in the business. And so what I would do is talk to a lot of people, and they may not be doing exactly what your passion is, but it might be a related, so you can kind of see that there's a relationship there. And so do your research, do your homework, but you do have this competitive advantage because you understand the customer. And boy, that is just so important when you're starting a business. And the other thing, just to toss in there, you have to run the numbers on your personal finances. So what do you really think you're going to bring in as an income? And is that okay? Does it work for your personal finances? If it doesn't work right now, if you take some steps, could it work in 2 years? And so therefore, as you prepare to launch your business, as you shift your mindset toward a business, you're also setting up your personal finances in a way that you can do this without causing yourself any sort of financial problems.
To follow up on that, Chris, too, on page 140 of your book, there's a little bit here about, what would she, whoever that was, I don't remember, recommend if someone thought farming might make for a good encore career. And, she would have them think first about their life goals and then take some time to write down the key points about that day and the life they want to live. And then there's some of these questions. And one of them is, do you want to wake up at 5 a.m. or ease into the day? So those kinds of questions. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, she had a career in, she grew up in the Bronx. She had a career in media and nonprofit organizations here in Minnesota. And she and her husband, they decided they wanted to own a small farm in Wisconsin. And, but they were very methodical about it. And they went to a lot of the extension services and a lot of the classes. They originally had an idea about goats. It turns out goats escape a lot. And there's a lot of expenses associated with goats that they decided they didn't want. So they went with cattle. And, but the thing that I admired is that they decided that they wanted to be farmers, but they did not want to burn through their 401k. And they would only do it if it was a sustainable business. They didn't have to make a profit. They had to have an ongoing sustainable business. And between the farm and then doing some side activities, he's a chiropractor. And then she also did some teaching about making pies and some other things in the kitchen. They had a sustainable business. But what I admired was how much research they did, how methodical it was, and how they tapped into expertise. I had a person not that long ago approach me, and they wanted to get into the landlord business, own a fourplex. And they were asking me, did I think it was a good idea? And I said, well, have you talked to any landlords? And they said, well, no. And I said, well, look, there's lots of landlords. There's landlords associations. You have to talk to landlords about what's it like to own and run a fourplex, and what are the issues that you're going to be dealing with, and what are the regulations. And so before you make that kind of a leap because you think that would be a good business for you, tap into all these resources, because fourplex owners will tell you, or just go to their conferences, which are now being on Zoom, but just go to their conferences, ask lots of questions, do your research. And that's what they did, the farmers. And, you know, it's, and so they took both their finances seriously, but they wanted this to succeed. There's no guarantees, but with research, you can really limit your downside.
There's another question in the chat. Mary Jean asks, can you speak to the soft side of the changes we go through our work life, e.g. the loss of identity as attached to our profession? What if we took a part-time job with a low profile?
Yeah, so I remember a colleague of mine, wonderful colleague, and she asked me to go out for lunch, and she had good reviews. She's a valued colleague, but she said she felt invisible, and she just was invisible. And so we talked about that, and it was time and she took that as a signal that it was time for a change, to go somewhere where she wouldn't be invisible. And my advice to her was, what she really liked doing was selling. And in the nonprofit world, finding someone that likes to sell is like gold. And so, because many people go in the nonprofit world because they don't like to sell, or they don't want to be selling. And so she made a shift, was very thoughtful about it. It wasn't so much that anybody was being bad or anything like that, but she had become invisible. So it happens. And I think you have to take that aspect of things seriously when you're looking at where else do you want to go. Many people that I know who are in the for-profit sector or the professional sector want to go work for the nonprofit sector. They want to give back. And, you know, it's fairly standard advice. My advice is, well, you know, you want to go volunteer at this organization, because there are a lot of really badly managed nonprofits out there. There are also some really well-managed nonprofits out there. You have to volunteer, you have to get to know the people, and then you have to ask yourself an additional question. Do I want to work at a place like this? Or maybe I like this field, but this is not the organization for me. It might be another organization. But as far as your, thinking about who you are, I think at the end of the day, all of us want to be useful. All of us want to be helpful, and all of us want to be treated with respect. And so when you're doing your search, those are the three things that you need to be asking yourself. Is this a place that will treat me with respect? Is this a job where I'm tapping into my skills, my knowledge, my experience that I've accumulated all these years, and I'm able to be helpful, and I'm valued? And if you're not, keep looking.
So I would ask, I'm going to just shift us back for a second. Anybody, again, if you have a question, put your hand up, type in the chat, we'll try to catch it. I do want to ask you, Chris, in the book, you actually, I'm not sure which chapter this is, it might be doing good and doing well. You mentioned that we've shifted away from the industrial age where we invest in physical capital. The last 100 years, we started to invest in human capital. Do you see a shift where we will see employers investing more in their older population? Or is that only going to happen when we have that shortage of workforce?
So I think it is mostly going to happen when we have the shortage of workforce. And overall, it's part of a trend. Now, it's most stark with your older workers, but the fact is companies have moved steadily away from investing and training their workers. And there are really two reasons. One is decline of unions. And, industries, it used to be, they're in the sort of, I don't know if it's instability in industries, but industries have found, okay, if I train this person, they're going to go to a competitor and get a better wage. And so there has been sort of a move away from companies from training their workers. Now we saw, again, a shift in, in the late, 2017, 2018, 2019, more and more companies were investing in their workers. And so we definitely did see that go on. But I think that at this point, without unions and with all the instability in our society, this is something more for policymakers to provide the resources. It's more for people to build it into their financial planning, thinking about, am I going to have to pick up some additional skill at this community college or in this particular program that's being offered? But it's, again, that's where so much opportunity. And so some of the studies that we've seen coming out of Europe, where training programs with older workers have really paid off, particularly for women, 55 years and older. So we can see it, but we're at this conference. I can take a drink of water for 1 second, sorry.
And as you're drinking, Chris, I just want to be clear. So you're talking about that training by employers has dropped off for all ages, not just older people?
Yeah, and but it's particularly stark with older people. So we're at the Age Boom Academy, Columbia University. It's a wonderful conference, annual conference on aging and work. And there's a German professor there, and he says, well, you know, the German chemical industry got together with the German chemical industry and the government and the industry representatives, and they changed the rules, and older workers can now work longer without losing their benefits, and they can get all this training. And the room started laughing. And we go, that's great. And that's not happening here. You're not seeing that kind of 3 power centers that can get together and negotiate the terms. But I do think the fundamental point remains. This is a century of human capital. This is a century of we're living longer, we're living healthier overall. And two of the things that I would say is, as part of our conversation earlier that we were having, this is also where we need to improve life expectancy and health and education over the lifespan of lower income workers too. That's where all the opportunity is. That's where all the return on investment is. It's enormous.
Go ahead, Karen. I'm sorry.
I say Mike Kohler has actually posed a question, but unfortunately, Mike, my chat box I haven't got the whole question. I know you're in here somewhere. Can you just undo your mic and ask your question directly, please?
Sure. I totally agree that, especially from I'm in the business of dealing with employers about meeting their needs and so forth, right? That's what my day job is about. And they frame it in the context of shortage of workers, but they say they interpret it as shortage of the correctly skilled workers. So maybe you could discuss a little bit where that intersection is, because in Colorado especially, undeniably the demographic of older adults is growing and growing. So so as a society, we can't have us just sitting around doing nothing. Can you talk about the intersection, therefore, of what employers say, hey, we need people with the right skills, and how can we, as the older adults, be equipped to meet that need? So it's really a shortage of skills, not people, because we have plenty of people out here.
Right. And I actually don't think we have as big a shortage of skills as many managers will say. What they're really saying is, I don't want to spend any money training this person. I want them to come with the skills that I need, and I don't have to invest in training beyond the initial onboarding stuff that people will do. Because my sense is that most people can learn these skills relatively quickly. They're usually not that particularly difficult. They can be particularly difficult in certain industries. But overall, when people are talking about it, it really comes down to, we don't want to invest in the training. We want to hire someone that has the training already. And this is why so much has been outsourced into community colleges. Pick up the certificate, and then you'll add to your skill set, and you'll be considered more hireable. And this is where there was a wonderful late professor at University of Southern California, really one of the true management gurus, Warren Bennis. And I was talking to him this couple of years ago, and he was saying, here's the thing, Chris. I'm always amazed looking at a lot of these, you know, when people post they want a job, and it used to be that they wanted someone who could deal with HVAC. Now they're posting, we want someone who can deal with HVAC, but we also want them to be able to play the piano. And not only play the piano, but we want them to build the piano out of sustainable materials. And then we're going to consider hiring them. And then when the labor market starts tightening, they drop the build the piano sustainable materials, and the labor market tightens a little more. They say you no longer have to play the piano. And then all of a sudden they say, well, can you do HVAC? So I think a lot of this does really have to do with the tightness of the market. When managers complain they can't find the skilled workers that they need, they can find the skilled workers that they need. The question is at what price and how much training do I have to do? Because my feeling is, if you tell me that, I can have a line of people who have had great work experience, who are smart, who are knowledgeable, who just take a little bit of training, they can line outside your door and they can do the job. So this is where I think that we need to just recognize that there are, in certain industries, like in advertising, there can be some software programs, depending on what your job is, that change all the time, be very, very specific set of skills. But most of the time, these are skills that companies used to accept the fact that they would invest in the training. They feel like they don't have to. And for about 20 years, they didn't have to. And now I think we're moving into a world, and we'll see, post-pandemic, we're moving into a world where labor is going to be overall more scarce, and more of your labor force is going to be older workers. And I do feel that companies are going to feel greater pressure to train workers and be a little less demanding on the skill side.
Another thing on the training is that, a lot of companies that I'm familiar with, at least, when it's time to cut the budget, it's like training it's gone, like
Gone.
And so it's not considered to be a high priority. And the other thing about training, from my experience at least, is you have a tendency, at least in a large organization, to develop a core of professional trainers. And after a while, that becomes kind of a rote experience for them, and they sort of lose the contact with the actual people who are going to be whose work they're training people to do. So I think that somehow some of the companies that have these professional training organizations need to introduce sometime during that training period, they need to introduce people who are actually working in that area to come in and talk to people, as opposed to just having the trainer. So anyway, I don't know how, maybe you'll get a chance to talk to somebody about that at some point. But.
Yeah, no, I think that's important. It's also, on the training thing, now one industry, and just an anecdote, but one industry that does spend a lot on training are your big consulting firms. And they do spend a lot on training. And it was interesting, one of the biggest, I was having a conversation with them a couple of years ago on their training, and it was about technology and what, we've been talking about, and how they revamped their technology training, because they had a not mandatory, but essentially mandatory technology refresher when employees, partners would reach age 50, kind of bring them back to speed. And what they realized is they had to push that back to about age 30 or before, because the people they were hiring were coming in, had genuine skills, but they're then hired, they're in an airplane a lot of the time, they're working many hours, they're starting families, and all of a sudden all this technology knowledge that they supposedly had, it goes a little bit by the wayside. So the training program that they were using for the 50 and over, they moved all the way down to people who had just been there for a few years, and actually just sort of decided just to keep that refresher course going the whole time, because of the demands of the work.
Interesting. Thank you.
Chris, I would ask, you've talked about this, the tightness of the labor market is really going to drive employers to do things. Are employers looking at the demographic shifts? I mean, if you compare the census graph of 1960 versus 2060, we know we have a 32-year decline in birth rates, and they say this year it's even lower. Are employers looking closely at that because we have fewer young people to tap into?
Yes, and they're more and more aware of it. I mean, the numbers are so compelling, and so yes, they are more aware of it. You can't go to a human resources conference without this being a major topic of conversation, and it has been a major conversation for years. So we are starting to see progress. I mean, I think that is important, that we have a long way to go, but there also has been progress. This is not 1990 or 2000. There have been some differences, but I do think that still it's not taken as seriously as it should be. And I think one of the things that when we come out of the pandemic, the pre-pandemic workforce, about a quarter of the pre-pandemic workforce was 55 and older. So it's the population is aging, but so is your workforce aging. And so is your customer aging. But as we mentioned, that's where all the money is. So economics is really powerful, and it does break down stereotypes, but it's just taking longer than expected to do it. But that's so often the case, where you'll see something, you'll forecast it, you can look at the numbers, this is going to happen, aren't you going to adjust? And organizations don't adjust until they have to, until they see an opportunity, or they are forced to make an adjustment. And so they're all going to adjust. And the thing is, it's also a global phenomenon. So if you are a company that sells into a global market, the United States actually is one of the youngest demographically aged countries in the world. If you start going to places like South Korea, China, you go Italy, Germany, you have an older age profile. So this is not just a domestic story, it's a global story. And so if you're selling into global markets, you're selling into an aging population.
I would ask one more question. It's going to pull us back a little bit to the policy side of the equation. So I'm just going to say this name for people, and then I'll explain what the title is. It's called PWADA, and that is some legislation that I believe that AARP really promoted. It is called Protecting Older Workers Against Discrimination Act. It was actually passed through the House, I think, last year. And Chris, I don't know if you're familiar with it. I just wondered, now that our Senate is, 50-50, and Vice President Kamala Harris is the tiebreaker, do we have a shot at actually passing some legislation that might empower older people and really might get employers to think, oh gosh, I'm going to be sued. I've got to be much more cognizant of how I retain and engage an older workforce.
It is there. So what this legislation is taking into account, the Supreme Court in several rulings has basically made it almost impossible to prove age discrimination. And the EOC, the Equal Opportunity Employment, they still do investigations. There still is stuff going on, activity there. But the AARP has come out with this legislation to try and sort of push back against some of the Supreme Court rulings. I think there is a chance. The thing is, there's also so much on the plate right now. So when you look at the Biden administration campaign and taking campaign promises seriously, one of the things that they did emphasize with older workers was a sustained effort combating age discrimination. And so I think partly was this legislation was in mind. So it's definitely going to happen. The question is, with the other priorities that are going on, where does it fall? I don't think that you can say that aging and retirement are top of the list right now with the Biden administration. But this is one of them where you could see some activity. You also might see there's been a long-term push to create some sort of national IRA, national 401k. And with the success of a number of states that they've had with their state-sponsored IRAs for employees who work at companies, typically small businesses that don't offer their employees an employer-sponsored retirement savings plan, you also might see a push in that direction. And the financial services industry was very opposed to it during the Obama administration when this was proposed. But it appears that in the intervening time, the opposition has really weakened. And in fact, large parts of the industry have come around to this is probably a good idea overall to do. So that's another area where you might see some activity. The other thing will be on the labor side, and this gets into the age discrimination because this is an unusual group of economists that are in the Biden administration. They're all labor economists. Janet Yellen was a labor economist. Cecilia Rouse is a labor economist, head of the White House Council of Economic Advisors, and a number of labor economists have joined the administration. So there is this sense that this administration is going to be focusing on labor to an unusual extent compared to other administrations. And so age discrimination would fit into that push by the administration.
Go ahead, Bob.
I was just going to ask, do you think there's anything that can be done at a state level? I mean, use your state for an example, related to what you were just talking about at the federal level.
So in terms, yes, I mean, I think that on the state level, you know, again, working with the EEOC, there's a lot that can be done on the age discrimination side. And I think there's a lot that can be done on the retirement savings side. I mean, and now we have a template. I mean, frankly, most states should be adopting that template now. My state has been studying it. At this point, I just say, run the Xerox machine and copy California's, copy Oregon's. Looks like it works. Not been too many problems with it. And so I'd like to see some quick action on that front. Particularly as we come out of this. Our state governor just proposed his budget, and the budget is really geared toward how do we take advantage of coming out of the downturn that we're in,
You know,
or have been in.
as we talk a little bit about this policy side of the equation, it always baffles me, and maybe it's because our legislators look from year to year or a couple of years. If we look at budgets of states and the federal government long term, it's hard for me to understand why they wouldn't immediately gravitate towards incentivizing or providing opportunities to have older people continue working. If they don't work and they have savings, we will become more, very well connected to the state in its many programs or the federal government.
Yeah, and one, I don't understand it. Two, it does get at a core debate that runs throughout. There is an argument that, which I disagree with very strongly, but it's, if you just cut benefits enough and life is miserable enough, people will have to work longer. So we don't need to provide caregiving services. We don't need to provide training. We don't need to be spending money. What we need to do is just make it so that people don't have any other choice. That is, to my mind, a terrible way to approach it, and doesn't get to the human potential and the human possibilities and a better society and quality jobs. But the conversation that we're having, if you're in Washington, D.C., even before some of the current difficulties, really still the conversation in Washington, D.C. is dominated by the frail elderly, and we can't afford all these old people. That is really what the conversation still is, not so much about what we're talking about. And even on the state capital level, where there's a little more of this going on, it still hasn't risen to the top of the conversation for many policymakers, despite, as you mentioned, these very clear demographic trends.
Other questions? We've probably got about 8 or 9 minutes left. We are interested in hearing what you all want to know.
Yeah, actually, I have a question. I'm always figure that when you pass all this legislation, that it's the large companies that learn to comply, but probably the people we're trying to employ are going to work more likely in small companies that really just kind of ignore that legislation just because it's too complex for them to deal with. So I think legislation is probably kind of the last resort way solution. And I'm always worried when we start thinking about, well, what can the legislation do? We need to think of other areas that really matter.
Well, I do think that the legislation on ageism, adding that to the arsenal, I do think that that is still very important to move in that direction. But I do also think that you've hit on something very important, which is for many older workers, small business is where they're going to get employed. And that's where a lot of the employment opportunities really do exist, is among smaller business. And we don't pay enough attention to smaller businesses. And, bigger companies may offer more and more phased retirement. Bigger companies may offer more opportunities for part-time employment as you get older. But a lot of times when people are making a shift and they're getting another job, it's with a small business, and the human resources department and the IT department and are pretty much the same person, the owner. And he's the person that's going to be doing the hiring, and he's getting somebody that he or she, feels is going to be valuable to the organization. So small business is incredibly important as a hiring hall for older workers.
And I have another question in another area. It just seems to me like you're talking about people basically that take showers in the morning and not showers at night, and not recognizing, because I'm actually, one of my parts of my life, I'm hiring quite a few workers, and by the time they're like 55 into maybe 60, they're all limping and walking around difficult. And it's the morning people are not the same as the evening people. And I just feel that most of this thought process has gone into more the not really the workers.
So yes and no. I think you're absolutely right. People can, who are doing more physical labor, to reach a point where, the bodies are breaking down. But I also think it's really important to emphasize that many of these workers are also highly skilled, and they have real skills. And part of the book is I went to a nonprofit organization in Pittsburgh with machinists. And the machinists were in their 70s and 80s who were doing the instruction. And none of them expected to be an instructor. None of them had any, that was never part of their life plan or whatever. And they all loved it. They earned an income. They liked the teaching. It wasn't that physically demanding. It was mostly engaging. But the other thing is, the reason why the instructors were in their 70s and 80s is that the 60-year-olds, they were getting so many job offers with a shortage of machinists that they were no longer doing the instructing. It was now the 70 and 80-year-olds who were doing it. And also went to Dunwoody, which is one of our local technical colleges. And what they were talking about is electricians that, they reached an age, their bodies give out. They no longer want to be climbing up a ladder. They don't want to be holding the cables over their head. But it turns out they're great estimators on job projects. And so there's a lot of retraining going on in terms of job projects. So I think that a lot of the focus in this whole conversation nationwide is about the white collar worker. I think that's absolutely true. I think we're underestimating what may be the prospects for the blue collar worker, not continuing to do exactly what they've been doing, but they are highly skilled and they have genuine knowledge, genuine experience in moving into sectors, and mentorship, apprenticeship, teaching is one of those sectors that is less physically demanding, but still is engaging and taps into their skills. And we need to be focusing more on that. And again, and then there are some people for whom they need to retire and they need to file for Social Security. And, that's going to be the name of that game. But I do think that we need to appreciate more the skills that so many blue collar workers have, and how can we take those skills in a less physical context.
And one of the things we probably don't recognize is how really smart those guys are. I
Yeah.
would defy anyone on this screen to figure
Oh,
out the electronic circuit that the electricians deal with every day.
Exactly.
And I go down to our boiler room and there's pipes going everywhere. And I'm semi lost down there. But the pipe fitters come in and they know exactly where it's going and working and so forth. These people are really smart people, even though they never went to college. In fact, they may be some of our smartest people.
Oh, I would agree. There was something that when I was doing reporting for the book, and someone said something that really stuck with me. It was about looking into the, Karen, you mentioned about the apprenticeship systems. And, everyone admires Germany's apprenticeship system. And what the scholar said is, if you are an apprentice in Germany, you can actually dream about being CEO of the company. Says in the United States, if you're an apprenticeship, you can't dream of being CEO of the company, but you can dream of starting your own business. And that we do see a lot of going on with if you think about the plumber, the electrician, I mean, starting your own business is something that people with skill often do. In Germany, they can join the ranks of white collar management.
That's pretty significant difference.
Very.
We need to use that as an analog and present it here in the US, right? But that could be a long road.
Yes.
Well, we're at about 11:27. I would actually ask, Bob, do you have any additional questions, or Chris?
I don't have a question, but I do have a closing comment when we're ready. So go ahead, Karen.
I guess we take one more question, and then I would ask Chris, as we say goodbye to these people who were so interested in joining and learning from you, what key takeaways and actions would you suggest to this audience if they are really thinking about, I'm 50, I'm 60, I'm 70, I'm 80, and I want to, pursue the path of purpose and a paycheck. So we'll take one more question and we'll let Chris think about that, and we'll close with that. Anybody else have one more question?
I would take a shot. Chris, I'd seen an article the other day it was on Eisenhower, and it was talking a little bit about the interstate highways, in the 50s kind of being built, and said that he had actually been on a trip right after World War I in 1919, where he went cross country. And they took military vehicles the whole way, and it took them several weeks to take this trip, and it kind of lingered with them. And they had pictures of military trucks that had kind of gone off the side of the road in Kansas as they stopped for a whole day to pull one out. And I guess going with Karen's question is, okay, somewhere between the muddy dirt roads and the interstate system, where are we right now in terms of kind of the 100-year life, and where purpose and a paycheck fits in it? And what can we be doing? What are the roads we can kind of be paving right now that can make a difference right now? Tying to Karen's question, what can people be doing to start to get us headed towards that paved system of the 100-year life, if that makes sense?
So, no, it makes complete sense. So in technology, there's a thing called the S curve. And, you can look at with telephones, you can look at computers, all kinds of things, farming. And, I feel that with the S curve that we're in the inflection point where we are starting to take greater advantage of the older worker. We're starting to shift the way we think about older people, where stereotypes are starting to break down. Even as a small thing, you mentioned, reading an article, if you read the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Financial Times, they now always have articles about artists in their 60s and 70s, not about what they did in their 30s, but about what they're doing now, and about some creative enterprise that they're doing. And they're no longer holding them out as unicorns. It's like, this is just sort of a routine thing they're doing. So I do think that we have made a shift. I think the economics is there. I think the demographics is there. We still have a long way to go. As an individual, if you think about getting older, we've had almost a 30-year conversation about have I saved enough in order to retire? And that's been the conversation. And, do I have enough in my 401k? Have I put enough in stocks? Have I put enough in bonds? How is my asset allocation right? And I think we really need to shift that conversation. Savings is important, but we really need to shift that conversation that, as you get older, what do I want to do next? What skills do I need? How are my finances? Can it support a job change? Can I go and take 6 months off and get some additional education? But it's really thinking about what comes next. What do I want to do next? And building that into your planning. As an individual, I think that's incredibly important. There are little steps that you can take. I was at a conference at the Urban Institute, and it was on aging. And a variation of your question was asked, what can every individual do to combat ageism? And Ruth Finkelstein, who's she was at Columbia University and now she's at Hunter. And she said, well, tell your age. I'm 64. Well, I'm 67. When someone asks you, I'm 67. What's the, and instead of saying, well, I don't really want to tell you my age, I'm in that, no, you're 67 years old. What's the big deal? Little steps like that. And I think it's, if you're working in organizations, it's about, talking to managers about opportunities. Why don't we have phased retirement? Why don't we have a system for going toward? Because one of the things that we really need to do, and this is why we've made the inflection, but now the struggle is how do you institutionalize what we're talking about? So I would imagine most of the people in that with the Zoom, worked in organizations that have a 401k or have a 403b. And, when you retire, you get your package, and it's a packet, here's where you are. Well, we don't get a packet that says, here's your volunteer opportunities, here's are your work opportunities, here's how you go about starting a business. How do we institutionalize a lot of these choices so that it's easier to plan, it's easier to prepare? And I think talk to your representatives about the importance of, one of the things that I've been advocating is for the again, we got to come out of this post-pandemic world, but for the co-sharing workspaces, the incubators, welcome older people. I know it's wonderful. You run that ad and these beautiful young people running through the mountains of Colorado, with their tattoos and their fleece. But if you actually walk into most of these places, there's an awful lot of people are there in their 50s, but you never talk about them. And I'm not just talking about the mentors. I mean, people who are there to try and start a business. So start welcoming older people who want to start a business, who want to be self-employed. Make it a place that they want to come to. Make it so that, places like Denver, when they're on lists of places to come start a business when you're 50 and older, Denver's on that list. So I think that there's actually a lot that we can do. And there's a lot that we can do as advocacy, but as an individual, I think it's really trying to prepare yourself for thinking about not retirement, but thinking about what do I want to do next? And as within organizations, it's about combating and sort of saying, I have skill, I have knowledge, I have experience, so do my peers. You want us to stick around. You want to tap into our experience. And then as citizens, it's really about trying to change the dialogue. This is a grassroots movement. This is not a top-down movement. It's truly a grassroots movement, and it is spreading, and it will make a difference.
Bob, you had some additional thoughts.
Well, first I want to thank you, Chris, for your time today and your comments, and very insightful, much appreciated. And I also put a link in our chat. We are having something called Older Coloradans Week starting the week of February 8th. And basically it's actually 3 days, and there are 4 webinars, spread over those 3 days. And one of those, the last one, is actually focused on older workers in the current Colorado workplace. So I would encourage all of you who are on here to take a look at that and see if and sign up if it sounds interesting to you. So that's all I had, Karen. So go ahead.
Well, I thank everybody for joining us. We're 5 minutes over, but Chris, thank you so much. It's been.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. Thank you to everybody who participated in this. I really appreciate it.
And just so everybody knows, we will in fact be sending out a link to the recording. It will be on the Colorado Senior Lobby website as well. So thank you all and have a lovely day and start planning what's next.
And don't
Thank
expect
you.
it to be posted today. So, you know,
No,
give us a.
no, it will not be today. Thank you very much. All
Thank
right,
you very much.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right,
Bye-bye.